Welcome to the Indy CIO Network Race and Tech virtual dinner event featuring Dr. Ruha Benjamin and sponsored by InterVision and AIS. We have an incredibly powerful program planned for you this evening. I'm Jeff Tunn, founder of the Indy CIO Network and strategic IT advisor to one of our sponsors, InterVision. I'd like to welcome our guests from around the country with a special shout out to our sister organizations, IT Leaders of Indianapolis and Women in High Tech. To our guests, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Indy CIO Network. The network is a 10-year-old organization made up of CIOs and senior IT leaders. What started as a group of 4 or 5 individuals having lunch together 10 years ago is now over 300 strong. Our purpose is to exchange insights and ideas across industries and across organizational size. Through our networking, we learn, we grow, and therefore our companies and teams learn and grow. We offer several types of experiences, all aimed at fulfilling that purpose. These experiences range from informal dialogue around a given topic to educational dinner events like tonight. If you are a CIO or a senior IT leader and would like to be a part of our group, please visit www.indyc.io. If you don't live in Indianapolis and would like to be a part of a group like this, please reach out to me. I'm happy to share our experiences and how you might get started. We are excited to partner with 2 amazing sponsors for tonight's event, InterVision Systems and AIS. We are going to hear from their respective CEOs shortly. We are also honored to have Dr. Ruha Benjamin as our keynote speaker. We will follow Dr. Benjamin's remarks with a panel discussion. A little bit of a personal aside. Tonight's program has been born out of my reaction to my own inaction. Like many across the country, the death of George Floyd and the resulting protest was a wake-up call of sorts. A wake-up call that has come years late. Inspired by my son Brad's action, I set out on a mission to learn. I reached out to my friend Wayne Patrick of AIS. At about the same time, Alicia Gaba, Senior Vice President of Marketing at InterVision, reached out to me about focusing our podcast, Status Go, on this issue. About that same time, Lamont Hatcher, the CEO of AIS, reached out with insights and suggestions. The 3 organizations, the Indy CIO Network, InterVision, and AIS, have joined together to bring this issue to the forefront of our respective organizations. We are here to listen. We are here to learn. We are here to elevate the voices of our colleagues. Thank you very much for being here this evening. I'd like to turn it over to Aaron Stone, President and CEO of InterVision. Aaron?
Thank you, Jeff. And it's a real pleasure to be here tonight. And I think probably there's quite a few folks on the call that are not familiar with InterVision. So I'd like to do just a quick intro as well as share a glimpse into our journey with respect to race and tech. So our vision is to transform business through the evolutionary power of technology. And it's a powerful vision that's, we could have put incrementally improve with standard technology. We really want to transform organizations. Jeff, do you mind moving on to the next? And this has come with a lot of transformation just for ourselves. So over the past few years, we've taken 7 companies and integrated them into the InterVision of today. So over 300 employees, 12 locations across the United States, and more importantly, a real true comprehensive portfolio, bringing those different strengths from the different entities together into one overall cohesive organization. And that really ties into our mission, right? So for us to achieve on our vision, we really focus on executing on our mission. And that is to unlock value by delivering innovative technology through a consultative approach. And we're very proud of we call it our 3 rights. It's really the things that makes us unique. the combination of our right premises, being able to help our clients with working in public cloud like AWS, Azure, hosting in an InterVision data center, on-premise facilities, also that right technology. So an amazing mix of infrastructure solutions, resiliency solutions, and digital communications. And then the last piece is the right model. So for some customers, it's helping them with professional services to help set up solutions. Others, it's helping them with an ongoing care and managed services. And maybe the best thing I can do on this is to share a couple stories. So how we've been able to execute on that mission. One is a national bank with a little over 250 locations. We've been working with them on their data center solutions, their on-premise data center for many years, and their networking solutions. They're working on their branch of the future, and part of that is likely going to include a move towards AWS, and then managed services to wrap around that. So, really helping them, and I won't go through all the details of what that branch of the future looks like, but I'll say, taking that expertise we have with their on-premise solutions, mirroring it with what we bring to the table on AWS to help them design that branch of the future. That's where we're really helping them unlock that value. The second story I'll share is a company that's in the auto warranty business. They've, as you can imagine, they rely heavily on their phone system for their contact center. That's how they interact with customers. That's how they get new leads, new opportunities. So it's crucial for them. So we worked on how can we make it more resilient? How can we have it so that as they're growing, they've been growing very fast. How can we help them so that they can have unlimited scale? And the result was a solution that was more cloud-based phone system, lots of additional redundancy, and then wrapping around that a managed service to make sure that it's there and we can help them scale as they grow. And the last thing we've added in, which was really exciting, was a machine learning and AI assessment, more of a discovery consulting engagement. As you can imagine, most of their interactions are with their contact center, with customers on the phone. So we're working with them to figure out how can we find ways to maybe make their customer experience a little bit better, or how can we make their team a little more productive through the use of ML or AI. So those are just a couple examples I wanted to share on how we work to help our clients and achieve our mission. But a little more core to who we are our values. And it's usually in unique times where you don't have a playbook, you don't have something that's a standard policy to follow where these come into play. And similar to Jeff's personal story, this was definitely the case with the recent senseless killings of people like George Floyd. InterVision has historically been more of a color neutral work environment, but it made me, candidly, really consider, is that enough? And the answer was a resounding no. So I thought, how can we have values like do the right thing and challenge the status quo and have a more of a color neutral approach? And obviously that didn't make sense. So the values are really what helped empower us and push us to do more. So I started a dialogue with pretty much across all employees, and it was focused on time for positive change. And it's been an amazing reaction. The amount of ideas and suggestions, it's been a waterfall, candidly, on good ideas we've gotten from folks. So what we've done, and this, as I said, our journey with Race and Tech is we're moving from more of this, color neutral approach to launching a diversity and inclusion team and taking those ideas and working to execute those within our culture. Those ideas have ranged from how do we get more diverse candidates to how do we do better at public outreach to promote young Black students in schools to be more interested in the tech industry. And we've done things like launch a new civic service PTO day to let people have the time to go and make those positive impacts. So like many in technology, we're not where we want to be. With the mix that we have, it's definitely not where we want to be. But the silver lining of the events that have unfolded here recently is that it's really pivoted us to a much more proactive approach. And that's why I was so excited to be involved with this today. Personally, a chance for me to learn more and hear from some of the great speakers and panelists. So with that, Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. I'd now like to introduce Lamont Hatcher. Lamont is the founder and CEO of AIS, recently recognized by the Indianapolis Business Journal as one of the 25 fastest growing companies in the area. Lamont, the mic is yours.
Thanks, Jeff. It's an absolute pleasure for us to be here tonight. To our guests, we want to thank you all for your participation and your willingness to, as Jeff said, learn more. I also want to stress how much we at AIS truly appreciate the Indy CIO Network for the opportunity to partner and share a few words about AIS. AIS is a proactive IT consulting, infrastructure, and cybersecurity firm. I believe that our primary differentiator is our ability to work with leadership in the organization to provide strategic solutions that transform the organization's IT footprint to achieve positive outcomes. We've been serving the Indianapolis market for the last 8 years, and we're headquartered on the north side of Indianapolis, around 96 Meridian area. We have existing relationships in both the public and private sectors across the Midwest. After working many years in the enterprise level, we found a huge gap in the IT marketplace, specifically for the SMB space. While larger enterprises were more forward-thinking when it came to IT, they were also early adopters of new technology and looked at technology to help them operate more efficiently, better serve their clients, scale, and gain a competitive advantage in the marketplace. We realized that, of course, SMBs wanted to achieve these same objectives, but were hampered by either the budget, mindset, or capabilities to implement large-scale or relatively complex solutions. IAS was founded on the ideology that we could significantly impact the success of SMBs by making enterprise-level technology solutions and innovations, design, architecture, governance, security solutions, best practices, and methodologies accessible to SMBs. We work to achieve these goals in a variety of ways with our customers. While some prefer to outsource the entire day-to-day IT operations, allowing their own internal teams to focus on organizational initiatives, there are those that prefer to leverage our talents for smaller initiatives such as cybersecurity, IT project work, governance, or even wireless implementations. One example is the new Victory Field wireless project, in case anybody gets to go outside and enjoy it. Also, while we are recognized, as Jeff eloquently put, as one of the industry's top technology solutions provider by the IBJ Fast 25 fastest growing companies, or even the Inc.com top 5,000 fastest growing companies in America, we strive to be so much more than that. When you hear about AIS, we hope what comes to mind is what we truly stand for, which is being all in to serve. We make it our mission to give back to the Indianapolis community, both from an overall company perspective, but also individually through organizations such as Women in High Tech, Daymar Services, BDPA, American Red Cross, the United Way, YMCA, or even the Kelly School of Business, just to name a few. By supporting these non-for-profits and educational organizations, we strive to gain even more perspective and attempt to leverage our talent as servant leaders in the Indianapolis community. Personally, I believe that we've attempted to create a long and deep culture of promoting volunteerism, leadership, and financial support for non-for-profits that make our communities and industry even better as we continue to connect with other businesses, individuals, and organizations, no matter what their sector or scope. We hope to continue our effort of serving as a valuable resource in the Indianapolis community. Again, I want to make sure I thank everyone in attendance tonight, and I want to turn over the remaining time back to the moderators.
We're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so on a panel discussion. If you have questions, I don't promise we will be able to get all your questions tonight. We've got a lot of people that joined us for this discussion today, so we'll try to get to some as we can, but we will follow up after the event and address the ones we don't get to. To my panelists, remember to turn on your video, and hopefully we don't utter the 2020 catchphrase, "You're on mute." So let me introduce the panel to you, and we will get started. As I introduce you, I would love for you to please say hello so our participants can put a voice with a face and a name. I'd like to start with my co-moderator, Darcy Lee. Darcy is the Director of Sales for AIS. She is the past president and emeritus of Women in High Tech here in Central Indiana. Welcome, Darcy.
Thanks, Jeff. Great to be here.
Next up is Angela Henderson. Angie is the Senior Director of IT for BC Forward. Thank you for joining us, Angie.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Mike Gill. Mike is the CIO for Marion Inc. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Jeff.
Terry Morris is the Director for Information and Digital Solutions at Eli Lilly. Terry, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Martin Van Buren. Martin is the President and Chief Operating Officer of Lavera Education Services. Welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Jeff. Great to be here.
So, panel, as you know, we've divided our questions this evening into three major sections, if you will. But I don't want you to feel bound by that. It's really more of a marker. But we're going to talk a little bit about your journey, perhaps some of the challenges you've encountered. And as Dr. Benjamin reminded us at the end of her talk, this is about action. So we want to spend the bulk of our time on action. And so Darcy and I are going to be switching back and forth in different sections, asking the questions. But I'd love to start with your journey. And if you don't mind, just I'll call on each of you individually as we go through this, but tell us about your journey and why this topic of race in tech is important to you. Angie, if you don't mind, I'd love to put you on the spot and have you go first.
Okay. So, as Jeff mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of IT at BC Forward. It'll be 3 years in October. Prior to BC Forward, I spent about 25 years as a developer, primarily in business intelligence and data warehousing. Got BS Business and Computer Information Systems from IU School of Business before they added Kelly to the name. And then I have an MBA in Applied Management from Indiana Wesleyan School of Business before they added DeVoe to the name. So when the George Floyd incident happened in May, our CEO, Justin Christian, asked if I'd be interested in writing an article to share my thoughts or concerns about systemic racism. I don't know that I can point to blatant or outright racist situations that have happened to me outside of a few slights or a couple things that made me raise an eyebrow too, but I do know IT. And through the years that I've been in IT, I've constantly seen the repeated thing that none of us can deny, and that's just that there are not a lot of Black people in our industry, and definitely not a lot of Black women. And retention of Black people in IT positions is even lower. So, and in the past, I've operated in a vacuum of whatever company I worked for or school I went to, but now that I'm in IT leadership and expanding my horizons in the bigger pool of peer groups like the Indy CIO Network, IT Leaders of Indianapolis, or attending the symposiums and conventions, I mean, it's just become almost uncomfortably obvious that there is a significant Black and brown void in our industry. So when Justin asked me to write the article, I decided to write it from an IT perspective and just tell my story. I was going to keep it straight and plain. Our plan was that my statement, along with the one written by Justin and a couple other Black leaders in our company, will be posted on the bcforward.com website as well as on our social media platforms. And at first, I was honored that our CEO asked me to speak on such a sensitive subject while also, representing our company. But then once I sat down and started writing my thoughts, I became overcome with fear. Talking about race is like opening Pandora's box. So whatever I decided to write in this article will be publicly available to be seen by the masses. For sure, there are going to be people who disagree with my perspective, and some people might actually be angry by it. And so I started getting scared, how will this affect my career? Will I be labeled or blacklisted for speaking my truth? And if God forbid, someday I'm not employed by BC Forward, could this article somehow come back to bite me? So yeah, I was scared to death and almost took the sugar-coated passive-aggressive path when I started writing. But then I kind of circled back to reality. I mean, there were no lies there. This was my truth. And if I had the courage to come and tell how I was affected by everything that was happening in our country, maybe someday somebody else would be comfortable sharing. So fast forward a couple weeks, I got an email from Jeff tell me about this upcoming plan to do this, and asked me if I'd be interested in sitting on this panel. And I don't know if I got the invite because I'm a Black female in IT leadership, or if he saw my article on LinkedIn, or if it had both. But when I saw his email, the first thing I thought was, oh Lord, here we go. The cat is out the bag, the toothpaste is out the tube. Hello, Pandora, because I put that article out there and now look what's happening. So I rolled up for a few days, and before I finally got back to him and agreed that I would do it. But I didn't even actually tell our CEO or anybody from our company for that matter that I was going to be doing this, because it's just the fear of talking about something like this was in my chest. Fear of saying the wrong things, fear of saying too much, not saying enough, and just failure. So, but anyway, here I am, here we all are, and I'm very grateful, Jeff, to get the invitation. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Benjamin, because I've learned stuff from her that I just didn't even know was aware. So hopefully my presence here will serve a good purpose.
Well, thank you very much, Angie. And we really appreciate the fact that you wrote that article on the BC Forward website and that you agreed to be with us tonight. Mike, I'd like to toss to you and get a bit about your journey and why this topic is important to you.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Dr. Benjamin. Some of the things that she touched on definitely will come up in my story, and I'm sure some of the things we discuss here. I'm a coder and I'm a visible minority immigrant. So that's why this topic is very important to me. My parents immigrated from India to Canada in the early 70s. And when I was born, they decided to give me an English name or a white name. So they named me Michael, and they gave me my Indian name as my middle name. And in our culture, my religion, which is Sikh, all the men have the same middle name of Singh, which I did not have. So during my immigration process in the early 90s, when I came to the US, part of that process, you can have a legal name change. Most people use that to switch from an ethnic name to a quote unquote American name. And I use that as a chance to change my name to actually Manjinder Singh Gill, who I really am. Now, I have no issues with going by Michael or Mike. Obviously, in my day-to-day interactions, everybody calls me Mike. But I thought we had come to a time when cultural names were accepted. Fast forward to after 9/11, and now with all the anti-immigrant political climate we have, I wonder sometimes if I've made the right decision. And even highlighted by Dr. Benjamin's discussion that there obviously are some biases that still exist. So the hate towards brown people is real. And to me, it really hit home when there was a killing of 6 people at a Sikh temple in 2012 in Wisconsin. After that tragic event, one of the things I remember vividly was the president of my company, Marion's Milwaukee location, gave me a call. And he's a white guy that grew up here in Indianapolis and moved up to Wisconsin. And he called me to make sure my family was okay and that if he could help in any way. And that gave me hope. So I want to bring the voice for those who come from a different religious background, from a different cultural background. And as a coder and a CIO, that's specifically why I want to talk about race and tech.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you sharing your story with us. Terry, I'd like to toss to you next and tell us a little bit about your journey and why this topic is important to you.
Well, first, thanks, Jeff, for inviting me tonight. I've been in IT for 20 years plus, and it's interesting. While I've been with my current employer for all of that time, the first part of my tenure was pretty successful. I just knew that CX whatever was going to be on my title, soon thereafter starting. But it was pretty early that I had an experience with a supervisor that set a downward spiral of experiences for And I really struggled to get help to sort out, how do I navigate through this experience? And so it took several years. In fact, most of my uh, uh, class were promoted much quicker than I. And so if I had not been recently married or had a child on the way or a house, kind of all three of those, I'm certain I would have pursued something different. But then I was able to get a supervisor that, when I first met her, she said, look, I don't know any of your history, don't know any of your experiences, but if you're telling me that you have more than what the evidence is showing, I'm willing to give you a chance to see that realized. And it was a white female. The previous supervisors I had were white males. That grace she extended me gave me a lot more objectivity around what was possible. And then I have since leaned in to developing people. I have leaned into being a very clear and robust advocate for DNI. As not just a check the box, but where we seek to see transformational outcomes because of the inherent value to different ways of thinking, different ways of actually pursuing outcomes. And one of my night jobs is to serve as the president of a large organization for Black IT professionals called BDPA. I serve as the national president, and that group was formed expressly for this purpose as a place for Blacks in IT and beyond to grow and develop. Our motto is advancing careers from the classroom to the boardroom because we need more diversity from the classroom to the boardroom.
Excellent. Thank you, Terry. And I can say I've enjoyed getting to know you over the last several weeks since we were introduced by Lamont. So I appreciate hearing more of your story. Martin, I'd like to turn the mic over to you and hear, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your journey and why you agreed to be on this panel tonight. Why are you here? Why is this topic important to you?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. And, really from my standpoint, it's ironic, a white male who's been in tech leadership for probably 20 years, that this is really important to me, but it is close to the heart. And it's for a few reasons. First of all, my wife has had her own business for 22 years, co-owns it with another gentleman. And I witnessed firsthand, probably 24 times, different discussions she was having with executives at utilities, which are her customers, where they wanted to talk to the owner, and she tried to explain she was. And they said, no, they wanted to talk to Mark. And, we've been through this. I mean, these are very personal because, I watched her on the other side. And what she felt like is she was put down going through that. And it really kind of started to start me on a journey a little bit. Ironically, I think it took a little bit longer to have my aha moment, but I started also volunteering in a maximum security prison as well as in the inner city. And we have several programs in the inner city, but ironically, one of them was housing, and we work alongside ex-offenders. And I happened to be at a house one time, and I walked away, and a couple of us did. We went to get some tools, and the police came by and picked up the gentleman we left behind. And it was interesting. They thought that he might have drugs on him. They started questioning him, and they took him in, and it was really interesting. It was my first exposure to racial profiling. And so when I kind of came back, and it was surprisingly hard to get everything cleared up, but it really opened my eyes about the profiling that really does go on, and how we all, and including me, I'm certainly complicit on certain issues. I don't want to pretend like I was holier than thou and I was perfect, but it really made me start a journey where I started to reach out, and I had to learn more about this. And the aha moment came when one of the other board members of this inner city ministry said, if you really want to understand it, go to somewhere where you're the minority And then, so I went to a black church and I walked in and people were fantastic, but I really felt uncomfortable. There was no action by anybody that made me feel that way, but it just started to kind of made me realize that, I just had different experiences and I really needed to start learning more about this issue.
Thank you, Martin. I appreciate that. Darcy, why don't you lead us through the next section?
Sure, thank you. We're going to talk a little bit about challenges. I found it really interesting, the bench as the illustration of the subtle spikes in the industry that Dr. Benjamin talked about. And I want to direct this question first to Angie. I got to start, women in high tech, I'm going to start with the woman. You talked a little bit about, the fear of speaking up. And I just thought that was really interesting because you have these like non-actionable and actionable things happening. You have people's perception, which Mike talked about a little bit. And then you have this fear of speaking up. So you have that inaction and the action. Angie, what are some of the subtle spikes that you think are in the industry that have caused challenges for you personally or that the industry faces?
Well, I mean, I just put it like this. And this is not just IT specific. This is just how I handle life in general. I operate under 3 rules: do more, be strong, and act like a woman, but think like a man. And so what I mean when I say do more, I've always been told that I have to work 10 times harder and 10 times better than my white or male counterparts if I want to succeed. Anything less, I probably won't get the opportunity, and average just doesn't cut it. With being strong, a lot of times, things are changing, but back in the day, a lot of times people just automatically assume that I was where I was, or I got a specific job, or got a specific scholarship, or whatever, because of affirmative action or some type of quota. Never mind my high GPA, high test scores, excellent work ethic, references, all that stuff. None of that stuff mattered. But it couldn't have been that I earned it. So I'm dealing with that type of thing, and I'm also wondering or trying to figure out how to just deal with that and work through that without, from a mental and emotional standpoint, but without putting a whole bunch of emotion out there. Because then, speaking of emotion and a woman, getting to my act like a woman, think like a man, women have a tendency, and I'm sure you can relate to this, Darcy, but women have a tendency to be told that you can't express too much, too forceful, be too loud, or show too much emotion, because those tend to be negative character traits for women. A man can have those same type of character traits, but he's seen as being a strong leader, where even charismatic, but we're seen as being bossy or pushy or emotional. And then here I am, I have the double whammy because I'm a Black woman behaving in that way. So then I'm labeled as the angry Black woman. And trust me, I have been called that several times throughout my life, in school, at home, at work, several times. After a while, I'm kind of getting up there in age. So after a while, it kind of rubs off me, but it's still there. And I know that there are young Black and nowadays Latina women are experiencing the same type of thing, just because we express ourselves in a way that we don't mean anything by it, but in a way that makes other people uncomfortable. So, I know this is a delicate topic, and I'm definitely not trying to make anybody uncomfortable, but that's my perspective.
Yeah, I can absolutely understand that. I was once called a bull in a china shop, so I hear you. Thank you for that. I want to direct the same question to Mike, because I feel like you talked a little bit about perception and what happened after 9/11. And Angie, you talked a little bit about stereotypes, preconceived notions, perceptions. So maybe touch a little bit on that, as well as talking about some of the challenges that you faced and what the industry faces in relation to that.
Sure. I think one of the biggest challenges being an Asian male that we face is that, if you look at the statistics, we're well represented in terms of the overall IT profession. And, so we make up about 20% of the IT profession, yet we're only at under 10% of the management and executive positions. So there tends to be, like, our spike, I find, is even when we focus on diversity, a lot of times that diversity focuses on non-Asian diversity programs, because they feel like Indians and people of Asian backgrounds are well represented in IT or even just professional workplaces. So we become a blind spot. And that can become, a very hard spot to be in, because we still, everybody who is a minority has a shared set of challenges we face, but we also have our unique challenges. And that's one of the things that, that's what I want to highlight here is that, as an Asian American, our biggest challenge ends up being the upward mobility and kind of getting forgotten in these, initiatives to deal with, we get included with diversity training, but then that's kind of where it kind of ends. And that's part of the spikes, I guess, that I see is that there isn't really the focus on all people. Really after 9/11, I grew up in Canada where there was like a larger Indian population. And so Sikhs, if you're a traditional Sikh, you don't cut your hair. I'm a bit more westernized. I do cut my hair. And after 9/11, I, with a couple of my friends who are Sikh, we joked, and some of them have cut hair and some of them don't. And, we said, I'm either going to get labeled as a Mexican that's trying to steal your, coming from the southern border, try to steal your job, or they're going to get labeled as a terrorist, a Muslim terrorist, but nobody even knows who we are as a group. So, we got our own work to do to educate, but that's really, we kind of get lost.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because I hadn't actually ever really heard that perspective before. So I appreciate that. Same question to Terry. I think it's really great what you're doing with BDPA as far as facing some of those challenges in the industry and helping to lift others up as well. Based on your own experience as well as your experience with BDPA, what challenges have you faced and what do you think the industry faces?
No doubt the energy around a more inclusive workforce is high, and it has been high, I'd even say, over the last decade. But the results haven't caught up with the energy. So therein lies the question. If the energy is high and this has been a thing for at least a decade, and I'm being conservative there, at least a decade, then why aren't we seeing results? And so I would offer that our tactics have not caught up with the aspirations that have been touted. And so if we truly want those results, then we have to try something different. And those are the types of things that the BDPA and groups like Women in Tech and others are really leaning in to help companies think differently about the profile of talent that they're going after, help the talent improve where there are readiness gaps. Let's address the readiness gaps. I spent a lot of time in my world with historically Black colleges and helping them to understand what industries are looking for and how does that look? I mean, so beyond just the words, how's that translated into experiences that the students need to bring into the interview? So so it's really to get to results. Both sides are gonna the employees and the employers have to lean in to find the sweet spot of where the talent and the needs meet. They aren't gonna happen because of hope. It's going to require some really depth of relationships. That's ultimately where I think the results can be found in the short run, while some of the infrastructure catches up.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I want to make sure that we save some time for the last question because that handbook on advancing racial literacy in tech that Dr. Benjamin pointed out, I was like, I got to get that. But also interestingly, I talked to a guy from the United Negro College Fund today, and he was talking about the readiness gap and how they're addressing it in the K through 12 space, which something I am very interested in with women in high tech, but didn't even know existed. So appreciate the work that you do, and thanks for sharing that. I do want to save some time for the end, but I don't want to skip over Martin. Martin, you talked a little bit about the challenges that you've observed. And so this is an interesting question for you. And my husband often talks about like being the white guy, right? And how, you have like a certain position in society now with the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But you still face challenges in the industry or see those challenges or are a part of those. So what challenges have you faced or do you see that the industry faces?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think for me, when I had my aha moment, I kind of realized that I've been complicit, if that makes sense. And I think it's people like me that are well-intentioned. And I have, several friends of color, minorities, and what I had to do though is I had to go out and be intentional about learning more. I had to go and put myself in places that when I realized there was an issue, I had to go and put myself in places where I saw and could learn and listen in ways that I never had before. And so for me, that really felt like it's interesting. Terry mentioned the historically Black colleges. I've done a lot of work in higher ed. I made a point to reach out into a couple of those colleges to talk about hiring and how does that work. And I think one of the challenges I see is we don't traditionally go look for people that don't look like us. And because we're going to then, as Dr. Benjamin pointed out, we're going to then start coding things that look like us. And so I think we all just need to realize that none of it's, intentional, but we are certainly complicit with letting the issue keep going and grow because we aren't putting ourselves in those situations where we are learning, we're seeing the other perspectives and realizing maybe we were blind and could have lifted another group up or lifted somebody else up and really just didn't take the time.
Yeah, and Dr. Benjamin talked a little bit about that, about indifference and lack of awareness. And I think that is a big challenge. And that leads us really well into our last section, which we think is really important and want to talk about, action, right? She said all the talk in the world isn't going to do anything. And I think a lot of people are in that situation right now where you don't want to be indifferent anymore and you don't want to be in the dark anymore. You want to be in the light. So question for the panelists, I'll start with you, Terry. What do you think, because you're already doing some things differently, right? But what advice would you have for what we need to do differently? How do we help each other learn and grow and act differently? How do we move to action?
No, thank you for that. I'd say that acknowledging that the status quo is just not working. The running the same plays, but expecting a different result. We'll be standing here a decade from now. And so one of the things that we're doing is really pushing the envelope of possibilities and really going to some places where there is a high concentration of profiles that may be ready-ish and invest there, doubling down to help the institutions and the communities where we're seeking to have more representation within the community, helping to improve the readiness of that pool. So we're doing that across the country, helping to improve the readiness of current talent in the workforce and students that are in college and high schoolers. I got a 14-year-old daughter and a 16-week-old son. Don't ask me how I got that dichotomy. But but my 14-year-old daughter is in our BDPA STEM development programs, so that she has a foundation that can give her a chance at success in the future. And those are the types of things that we all have to lean into. That gives us a chance at having a pool that is more diverse than what we have today.
Appreciate that. And I love that your daughter is already involved in STEM programs. So let's toss it to Angie. What do you think that we need to do differently? How do we help each other learn and grow and move to action?
I guess one of the ways you can look at it is, obviously the theme has been there's not a lot of Black and brown faces in IT. And I don't know if it's necessarily that it's a lack of interest in our communities, if there's not enough awareness or direct marketing, or if it's just not enough just diversity outreach. But I think that, things can be done, and we can't just look at, doing programs and having these meetings, and this is great, don't get me wrong. But then if nothing comes out of it, then what is it accomplished? So I think mentorship is important, building relationships. That's been said by a couple of people. I totally agree with that. So we obviously are all on the same page with that. And I think that'll go a long way to fixing our dilemmas. But another way we have to stop sitting in these conference rooms, but then we need to get out in the community and build relationships. I know something that BC Forward is very good at doing is BC Forward reaches out to a lot of the colleges and tries to, either give opportunities to students from an internship standpoint. We've worked with students from DePaul, we work with students at IUPUI, Ivy Tech. Some of these people have even gone on to be hired for us right out of college. And we've even had conversations with Notre Dame's data sciences program just to try to get out there. But I think it even goes beyond just talking to the college students. We got to, just like Terry was saying, we got to go younger than that. We've got to start talking to the kids in elementary school and middle school and high school. Like, for example, my daughter, she's going into the STEM program at IUPUI in a couple of weeks. My kids all started taking some type of coding or developing type class in elementary school. Well, back in our day, all we had was keyboarding and typing. But nowadays, things have changed a bit so that kids have that opportunity to start doing things. But the incentive has to be put out there to, first of all, let kids feel that they can do that this is something that can be a great career, that is interesting, and that there will be support. Because if it's something that's like foreign to them and that they're not used to, there's not going to be something that grabs it on. And I'm sure anybody on this call can relate. Indiana has a major brain drain. As soon as people get to the point where they can leave, people are out and leaving. So there needs to be something that's in place and something that's tangible that encourages kids to stay here. But if they're not seeing anything, if they're not seeing people who look like them where they're going, or if they're not getting that, support system, then they're going to go somewhere where they feel like they can find that.
Great points. Mike, what do you think about this? What do you think we need to do differently? How can we help each other learn and grow and move to action?
Sure. I'll take this as two parts to this. One is a more kind of culture, company culture, and I want to also reference back to Dr. Benjamin's talk about the actual AI code, just to talk about coding stuff that we can even do. But on the culture side, it really can start as very simple things. And that comes just from the conversations. And I've heard people talk about inclusion is just being invited to the dance, engagement is being asked to dance. So ask somebody to dance. And it could be little things like finding out, what kind of foods people eat, what kind of movies they're watching, and just start those little conversations. And the reason I say don't assume that everybody does what you do. And I'll go back to my days at IBM when I first started working. And, growing up with Indian parents, I had never eaten a steak. I've never had a steak. And our principal, after that first project, decided that he was going to take the entire team. So the executives, principals, everybody's going to go to this nice steakhouse dinner. I was excited, but I'll tell you, I was scared and nervous. Because one, I didn't know how to dress appropriately. You just kind of get intimidated by it. And so, we come to the steakhouse and, I decided that I was going to try to just do what everybody else is doing. And so we sat down, and I had never had a dinner with more than one fork before. There's 3 forks on the table, and there's 2 glasses of water, and it was just very overwhelming. And so I sat there, I said, okay, my strategy is going to be, I'm just going to look to see what everybody else is doing. So they pick up that fork, I'm going to pick up that fork, whatever. So I was making it through, but it throws you off your game because I was not at all focused on talking to the executives and making relationships. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why the upward mobility is not there. It's not just your technical skills, but you have to make relationships. So I was completely off my game. And then the waiter comes in and says, where are you going to order? And I said, well, it's a steakhouse, so I'm going to have a steak. And, he's like, then he proceeds to ask me what cut and how do I want it cooked. I had no idea. So I bring that up as an example of don't assume that people that are around you, even the simplest things, ask. And I think that one of the tangible things that people can do is a lot of times we'll go and say, hey, let's grab some beers after work. Let's go play a round of golf. And if you notice that there's people on your team, especially if they look different than you and they're not participating in those types of things, go ask, like, do you like beer? And if they don't like beer, maybe something else is their thing, and try to meet them halfway and say, okay, well, hey, let's go out, let's do something you would like to do, and I think that's something that each one of us can do without management getting involved. The other side of it, from a coding perspective, we talked about in Dr. Benjamin's discussion about the biases that are built into coding. And, I think that for those of you who are in the field of actually like developing code, you got to look at your SDLC and say, what are some of the things you can do to tweak that software development lifecycle? We all go through the design, code, and then, we go testing and all those things. But take a look at what are the data, how are you collecting the data that you're validating against? Who are the people that are your business analysts that are saying where the use cases that this needs to satisfy. And I read something similar about the AI stuff with the facial recognition. Facial recognition, there's so many companies doing it. In Asia, there's companies doing facial recognition, and guess what? They're good at detecting Asian faces. They're horrible at detecting white faces. And you come over here, and they're really good at detecting, white and faces, and really bad at detecting other faces. And so you start looking at it, and a lot of that is the coders and the people who are involved in developing the technology are really the main input into developing those algorithms and testing those algorithms to make sure that they work. So I would challenge people to look at your practices around software development. One of the simple things is come up with a UI standards guide. Think about the icons you're using. Have them vetted against some of these other groups to see, are they, being inclusive? Is there anything offensive? So go through a UI standards practice. I would say, same thing with how you train people to use the software. Go through those exercises, but don't do it one time. Just like you exercise your DR plan once a year, make it a practice that once a year you execute a diversity plan, and you can be focused just on the coding. It can be your whole company, but execute something like that once a year. And just the last thing I'd like to kind of add in there, don't go big, don't go swinging for a home run. And a lot of the coders out there will recognize that these days, agile development is the way to go. So bring that same principle of agile development to the table and just say, what, let's just break off a small little piece of functionality or a small little change. Let's make that, let's see, did it work? Did it not work? Let's calibrate and then work on the next change. So the same way you do agile code, you end up with a better product. The same way, take that approach to making these changes that we need to make.
I love that. Jeff and I often talk about how we're each on our journeys, right? And a journey is, it's never just one long story, right? It's like chapters in a book. And so I really like that analogy. Martin, what is your input on this? What do you think about what we need to do differently? How do we move to action?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Yeah, I've been on this journey probably about 5 years where I really had my aha moment, realized I'd been complicit. And I've really done some things that I think, were helpful. And I've done some things where I was like, boy, that was a dead end and I didn't really handle that well. And one of the first things I'd say is get uncomfortable. Go somewhere where you are in the minority. Go and see what it feels like to be that minority. And it really is different. It really makes you think and say, then when I went back to work, I could go back and say, how did I help people get comfortable? How did I onboard them? It goes from everything from onboarding to how I interact with them, how I would even talk and present. It really changed a lot about what I did. Probably the second thing is be intentional. One of the best things I did was I have an advisory board, both for my company and personally, and I made sure that I had at least one person of color and one female on that board. And I think the experiences they brought, I kind of joke that I'm a gifted slow learner. It takes me a while to pick up on things, but I was like, business started to improve right around the times I made some of those changes. And it was kind of interesting, where it's like, boy, those seem to coincide. It took me a little bit, but I got it. And I think it's really changed my perspective. So I'll take the issues that I think I have and bring them to those people. And they're like, well, some of your demographic might not agree with that, and here's why. Or some people might see a different perspective, and it really changes how I look. The other thing is, I think most of the people on this call could impact tech education. I think Angela alluded to this, that, really, especially, and I see it because we support some inner city schools, the tech education to attract minorities in where, the schools I'm at are heavily minority, it really lacks compared to some of the other schools. And it's everything from the technology to mentors to people just coming in to talk and teach about the careers. People need to be able to see themselves in that role and look at somebody and say, look, that you believe that they could do this. I saw that firsthand at the historically Black colleges I'd go to. 60% of our employees at Lavoro, we sold out part of that section, was 60% were minorities. And they could look at themselves and say, I could see myself working there, and it's not going to be, something where I'm uncomfortable. So, I think that a lot of colleges are looking for advisors on their schools, if you will, especially their business schools and tech schools, reach out there. And then probably the last thing I just say is volunteer where diversity is. You'll get a different perspective.
Thank you for that. Modeling is so important. I really like what Angie said too, is about show that there will be support. I think that's not something people talk a lot about, but show that there will be support. We've got Terry who talked about BDPA, and there's lots of other organizations out there. That's what United Negro College Fund is doing. That segues us really well into our last couple of questions about organizations and recommendations. So Jeff, Ton, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Darcy. What great conversations. I really appreciate everybody's input. I know we're running up a bit on time, but I would really love to go back to each one of the panelists again and ask if you could recommend a book, a podcast, a webinar, or an organization for people to go learn more. What would that be? So I'll give you a moment or two to think, and then I'll put you on the spot. So a book, a podcast, webinar, or an organization. And to our listeners, what we will do is we're going to gather these and more. And after the webinar, you'll get a follow-up that has links to not only these organizations and resources that we're going to talk about here in a moment, but also the resources that Dr. Benjamin mentioned, as well as others, so that you can go educate yourself. So I think I did my song and dance long enough. So Mike Gill, podcast, book, webinar, organization recommendation.
Sure, Jeff. This is one of the areas that, I did some long and hard thinking about, and unfortunately is an area that I think Asians have to do a better job of ramping up some of the organizations. There is one called Ascend, which is for Asian professionals, and they do a lot of the research in terms of diversity in professional workplaces for Asians. So that is one to definitely check out. The other thing is that we are looking for folks on this call that, if you want to reach out to me even, just to build those relationships with some of the other existing organizations to bring in more, other ethnic groups into the fold. And I've actually talked to Lamont, one of the hosts here, about that particular topic. Another thing that I would ask everybody to do is, that from an Asian background, at least in everybody, just kind of step up and try to make those changes you can. And one of the things that I personally did is step up, and next year there's an organization called SIM, which is more of a general organization, Society of Information Management. And next year I will be the president of SIM Indianapolis chapter. And from talking with the board over there, one of our focuses definitely will be more discussions around diversity and some more of these types of give back and opportunities for people to learn. So I'd say that's another organization right here in your backyard that you can check out.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Terry, how about you?
So since I serve as the national president for a national organization, shame on me if I don't make a plug. BDPA, I would encourage everyone to go visit bdpa2020.com. We have an annual conference that is intended to be an opportunity for our members and friends to engage in a conversation about how to advance their careers, how to deepen your knowledge of digital transformation, and how to build a network. This year, we are actually using a virtual platform, 6 Connect, to allow you to stay at your location of preference, but still have multiple opportunities to engage with us. And interestingly, this conference is August 20th through the 22nd, and we have been hit by many companies, high tech and beyond, here in the last several weeks, all looking to have an experience with us, career fair and content. So I encourage you to go to bdpa2020.com. and just 30 more seconds. BDPA exists to be a platform to help grow a diverse tech landscape. And we do that through persistent experiences throughout the year, all virtual, but then the culmination of that at a conference. And I can talk about it all day long. I'm sure that's not the desire here. Feel free to ping me via LinkedIn and happy to continue the dialogue.
Thank you, Terry. And I will say for our listeners out there, Terry is going to be on our podcast, on InterVision's podcast Status Go. We're going to be recording that this week or next week. I can't remember which, but it's going to drop before the conference. And we're going to spend much more time talking about BDPA in the conference. So appreciate that, Terry. Martin, how about you? Recommendation for book, podcast, webinar, or organization?
Yeah, for me, there was a really good, it was kind of a video done by a gentleman by the name of Phil Vischer, who actually created VeggieTales, on how systematic racism is. And I think for me, it did the best job. It's about 20 minutes long, and it just talks about how rooted racism is in some of our policies and just in our culture. And it really opened my eyes to kind of some of the things that I probably hadn't seen before. And it was just a really well spent 20 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. And Angie, how about you?
So I will recommend a person's podcast, but not one of her individual, because all of them are really good. So I like Angela Rye, and her podcast is called On One with Angela Rye. She covers, obviously her slant tends to be a little bit on the political side, but you can't really discuss racism without getting into the politics of it. But her podcast cover all forms and topics with regard to systemic racism and biases. So I would recommend her podcast. That's On One with Angela Rye. The book that I'll recommend, I'm sure everybody on this call has heard it, is Becoming by our former First Lady, Michelle Obama. And the reason why I would recommend that book is when I was reading it, I got it as a gift. When I was reading it, it just amazed me that how so much of her journey and her struggle, obviously she elevated to heights that I nowhere near, but how much I felt like I could relate to what it was like for her to grow up. So I guess I feel that if anyone really wanted to get an idea of what Black women in general, but definitely Black women have to go through in order to get to where it is that they want to be, I would definitely recommend it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And to our listeners, again, we will share links to all of these resources. And we didn't get to a lot of questions tonight, so we will be answering those. Those answers may come in different forms. They may come from podcasts, blog posts, different types of ways to communicate that. I would love to put one more person on the spot to talk about an organization that he belongs to. Since Lamont Hatcher was camera shy at the beginning of this and gave us his spiel about AIS without having his camera on, you can kick me under the table later, my friend. But could you talk to us a little bit about the organization that you're involved with here in Indianapolis?
Sure. I'm gonna jump off real. I'm gonna answer your question, but I was thinking about something earlier when everyone was talking about what do we do, how do we change it, what do we do, and it made me think about a story. I was sitting in a 100 Black Men meeting, which is the organization that you're talking about. And I was listening to Brian Roach, who at the time was the police commissioner. And one of the guys in the audience asked him, what can we do to increase the diversities in leadership positions within IMPD? And he raised his hands, held them up, and said nothing. And when he said it, first of all, I thought he was crazy for saying that, but that's something else. But I thought it was hilarious. But he went on to explain and basically said, you got to think about it from the numbers perspective. And don't quote me on the numbers, but he said, if we bring in a new class and it's 2,000, we might have 100 minorities apply. Then only 10 get in. So now you got 10 people on the force. And then when it's time for promotions, who are you gonna give the promotion to? The guy that you're with every day, or the guy that you never really talk to? The minority guy that is on the force that I really don't see too much. So it kind of goes back to what Dr. Benjamin said about a commitment to action. So the first thing we have to do is, to everyone else's point, first increase participation, but then make the individual commitment to provide opportunities for promotions. That's really where it starts. As far as the organization, 100 Black Men, that really comes down to mentorship. So I do work with Terry Morris on BDPA, and I work with 100 Black Men, and the difference between them is really the age groups. BDPA is where you're really going to find a lot of talent from a national perspective with kids that are in STEM. Whereas 100 Black Men, you're really going to go mentor. I spend once a week in high schools, and I'm really just talking to kids about, their dreams and goals, and just trying to show them something different. Because if you ask those kids, what do you want to do when you grow up? Out of 10, 9 of them are going to say, I want to be a basketball player or a football player. And you might have one that says, I want to own my own company, but he doesn't quite know what. So they need to see something different. So I encourage anybody to participate in 100 Black Men. And to Jeff's point before he asked, no, you don't have to be Black to participate in the 100 Black Men organization at this point. Kids value authenticity. So as long as you are authentic and you are trying to form those relationships, they could care less about who it's coming from.
Excellent. Thank you, Lamont. And thank you for letting me put you on the spot like that, my friend. I appreciate it.
No problem.
To all of our panelists, thank you so much. What this really showed me is we could do this multiple times and never run out of the conversations to talk about. So I think you'll see part 2 and part 3 as we move throughout the rest of the year and on into 2021. But thank you all so much for giving of your time and for being real and sharing parts of your story that I'm sure were not easy to share. I appreciate it. And to Darcy, my co-moderator, thank you very much. I will team up with you anytime. It was awesome. I appreciate that. And thanks again to our sponsors, InterVision. Aaron, thank you for the support from InterVision and AIS. Lamont and your team, thank you so much for your support of the Indy CIO Network. Until next time, thank you all very much and have a great evening.